gospel is ordained.
Glory to thee, O Lord, glory to thee.
Let us attend. The Lord said this parable: 2 men went up into the temple to pray, the one a Pharisee and the other a publican. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus within himself: God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, standing afar off, would not lift up so much as his eyes unto heaven, but smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone that exalteth himself shall be abased, and he that humbleth himself shall be exalted. The Lord said to the Jews that came to him, I am the door. By me if any man enter in, he shall be saved, and shall go in and out, and find pasture. The thief cometh not but for to steal, and to kill, and to destroy. I am come that they might have life, that they might have it more abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd giveth his life for the sheep. But he that is a hireling, and not the shepherd, whose own the sheep are not, seeth the wolf coming, and leaveth the sheep, and fleeth, and the wolf catcheth them, and scattereth the sheep. The hireling fleeth because he is a hireling, and careth not for the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and know my sheep, and am known of mine. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold, and one shepherd. The Lord said to his disciples, beware of men. They shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and into prisons, being brought before kings and rulers for my name's sake. And it shall turn to you for a testimony. Settle it therefore in your hearts, not to meditate before what ye shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay, nor resist. And ye shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren and kinsfolk and friends, and some of you shall they cause to be put to death. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not a hair of your head perish. In your patience possess ye your souls.
Glory to thee, O Lord, glory to thee.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.
It is hard for us, beloved, sinful and unwise as we are, to walk in the way of Christ. It's very, very hard, because we judge things wrongly so much, so often. And so in my catechetical class, I try to always remind men who come to me that Christ, whatever he says, is eternal. So when Christ brings men the resurrection, he opens to man an eternal life. And so his words are not merely words of this age, but they're the words of the next age. So when Christ says to a man, love your brother, he says this not because this is arbitrary, but because this is what the next age will be. Love your brother, because in the next age there is no hate at all, except in another place you don't wish to go to. And so we, however, don't judge his words this way. We judge temporally only. We don't think about things correctly, especially with regard to justice. We have this idea of justice that is temporal and carnal and human. And so we're always upset when things seem so unjust. but we also measure things by false justice. It goes back and forth. And so today with the publican and the Pharisee, it is so interesting because the publican is a massive sinner. He is an unjust man. He is a disgrace. And the Pharisee is the image of righteousness of that culture, of that time. And yet, the publican is so eternal, and the Pharisee is so carnal. It is so strange, the story that Christ gives to us. The publican comes to the temple, and don't be careful. Is the publican a lowly man? No, the publican's rich. He's rich because he's taking the money of all the people. So his clothes are fine, possibly finer than the Pharisees, though he doesn't have the huge phylacteries that the Pharisee has. But he has fine clothes. The publican's a rich man. But the publican is so wise in this moment, because the publican realizes that riches will mean nothing in eternity. The publican thinks about God's justice, and he realizes, how will I bear with the justice of the Lord? Can I stand before his face? And so the publican, though he may get away with everything in this world, and the Romans support him completely, and he has all the power he could want, and the wealth he could want, he knows this is fleeting, very fleeting. And he realizes, I will not stand a second before the throne of the Most High God, in whose temple I am in. But the publican is wiser even than this. The publican also remembers that the Lord is merciful unto ages of ages. For his mercies from eternity even unto eternity upon them that fear him, and his righteousness upon sons of sons, upon them that keep his testament, and remember his commandments to do them. The publican has heard these words of the Psalms, so he knows God's mercies from ages to ages, from eternity even unto eternity. And so he bows the knee in the temple and he says, God be merciful to me, a sinner. Because he knows that the law of the next age is mercy for those who ask of it in this age. And so he behaves wisely. So wisely, actually. Whereas the Pharisee is so strange, because the Pharisee knows the law of God and seemingly practices it, but he doesn't judge anything eternally at all. Not even at all. The Pharisee condemns the publican, he condemns other men, and he forgets that pride is not of the next age, except in hell, not in heaven. And so in exalting himself, he condemns himself for the next age, because he has no idea what he's doing. The Pharisee is very pleased with his own righteousness, but he judges temporally. He says, I fast twice a week, I tithe of everything I own. And this is good, and all the fathers say that this is good. But the Pharisee thinks only of this. He doesn't think of the age coming. And he dares to compare his seeming righteousness with God's. He doesn't think, as the publican does, about God's justice, and how will he stand before this justice of God. But at the same time, the Pharisee is wicked also because he denies the mercy of God, too, from the ages to ages. Because he condemns the publican as if the publican has no salvation. Could the publican be saved? Yes, if he repents. The Pharisee, too, could be saved if he also repents. But he is thinking only of this life and how well he is doing in this life. The publican is doing better, actually, in terms of money, but not the Pharisee in terms of soul. And so the Pharisee doesn't judge rightly. His sense of justice is off. He thinks the publican is unjust, and that is so. He thinks he is just, but that is not so, not compared to God. The Pharisee errs greatly. Despite his virtuousness, he errs greatly in this, because he doesn't judge rightly, and his sense of justice is not exactly right. Today, beloved, we celebrate St John Chrysostom. In fact, we celebrate something interesting. This is not St John Chrysostom's feast, his primary feast. Today is the day that his relics come back to Constantinople. Does God bring justice in this world? Yes, but we have to talk about justice carefully. Justice is always eternal. Why? Because everything in this life culminates in eternity. There can be no full judgment until the next age comes. There is no fullness in this life until the fullness of the age should come. So even justice is something that is only partial in this life. Does God punish men in this life? Actually, no. He chastises them so they'll be corrected, so they'll accept correction. The punishment is the next age. The entirety of the next age is punishment for those who do not accept correction now. Just like the entirety of the next age is glory for those who humble themselves now. Today we actually see the vindication of Chrysostom, a kind of moment of heavenly justice shining. Chrysostom, this pillar of righteousness, this man who's so good, so glorious, is condemned by a degenerate woman who builds her own statue of vanity in front of the church, and Chrysostom condemns the statue of the empress, and the empress has him exiled to a distant land, and he dies along the way, and she knows he will die because his health is weak, because of his great ascetical labors on behalf of God. And so Chrysostom journeys and dies on the way, and he is laid to rest in a place called Comana, which wasn't even as far as he was supposed to go, and he dies on the way. And what happens is that God brings his wrath upon this city. And eventually the emperor, 30 years later, brings him back again. The son of this woman, this wicked woman. Chrysostom's injustice is interesting because Chrysostom follows Christ. Chrysostom is condemned. He is a high priest. An image of Christ was the high priest. Chrysostom is condemned by high priests, by bishops and patriarchs and shepherds who are wicked. He's condemned, just like Christ is condemned by the Sanhedrin, so is he condemned. By men who wear the robes of righteousness but are not righteous. And Chrysostom is meek in this judgment when he undergoes it. He's meek. Because he actually knows he's fulfilling the way of Christ, actually, in this moment. He knows he's fulfilling it. He defends himself, but not with rancor, and not with violence, and not with hate. He remains passive, dispassionate, as he's being condemned. He defends himself, but passionlessly, meekly, because he has so much power. And Chrysostom knows that all justice is eternal. And so the fact that he's being stripped of his honors, that he's being stripped of his vestments, that he's losing his high dignity, does not matter to him. Because he knows that all dignity rests in the hands of the one who sits on the throne on high, who holds all judgments in his hands. So Chrysostom is not judged by these men at all. These men are playing a mockery of judgment, and Chrysostom bows his head and accepts it. But he knows that God is judging, and he knows God will judge in his favor. And so he bears with this injustice very peacefully. Very peacefully. In fact, he's condemned twice. Corrupt. And so when Chrysostom is brought back, righteousness is vindicated. Why? So the men on this earth will know the righteous will be vindicated in the end times. But there will be a final vindication of all righteousness. So Chrysostom's relics come back. That was quite a wild thing. The emperor greets the relics, bows to them, does prostrations to the relics, begs forgiveness for his mother, who is iniquitous and evil, and for his father, who is a sinner also. And he begs Chrysostom to forgive them and pray for them. And mighty miracles happen. In fact, the empress, the one who condemned Chrysostom, she is undergoing eternal judgment now, actually. Her grave would quake, actually. I don't know if you know what that means. Her grave would constantly tremble and shake. No one wanted to go where this woman was buried because it would shake constantly. Because her soul was in such damnation that her body was actually trembling from the wrath being vented upon her soul for the way that she had lived. It was wild. And the people were scared, actually. And so the emperor commanded Chrysostom's coffin to be brought to where her relics were, to where her body was, to be laid on this, and he begged him to forgive his mother, to pray that the Lord would forgive her, and immediately the quaking ceased. Chrysostom pardoned this woman for her wickedness. And he shows the justice of God. Mercy. Then when Chrysostom, they actually went through an entire ceremony. Chrysostom had been unlawfully removed, so they actually took his body out of the coffin, which was incorrupt, and they put his body very reverently on the throne he firmly sat on. Because they basically said, Father, we've sinned against you, we want to restore you to where you have been. We're putting you on the throne. And when they put him on the throne, all of a sudden, they heard from his lips these words, peace be unto all, though he was dead. And all the people were amazed, and they bowed. And many miracles were worked this thing. So does God bring justice in this world? Yes, but it's only an image of the justice that is coming. Just like the quaking of this woman is only a foretaste of the judgment that comes later. But it's not something of this life alone. It has to be waited for. It has to be received with expectation. But Chrysostom judged eternally. Did he fight over his office? No, because he knew he had an office in heaven. So he didn't fight. He actually saw everything eternally. He understood everything this way. Today, beloved, we celebrate also all the holy martyrs and confessors of Russia, all of them. All those who died in horrible ways, starvation, execution, brutality. Those were confessors who weren't killed. They weren't killed, but they were tortured and suffered great wounds. They spent ages in prison and survived it. And these are called confessors. So we celebrate both the martyrs and also the confessors who suffered in communism in the 20th century. And there's one story I'll tell you that is illustrative of this entire era. And I've told you this story before, but it's so good that it bears remembering. There was a village in Russia somewhere, I don't remember where. In this village there was a very young priest. He was ordained when he was 21. He was very good. And so he would pray, and he was ordained right as the revolution was happening, maybe right after the revolution took place. So he was ordained in that awful time where there was civil war and all kinds of trouble in Russia. The communists hadn't totally taken control, but they were beginning to. And this young priest was in charge of this village, and he would conduct processions all the time. He would pray. He was very, very diligent and very virtuous and very good, and he prayed ceaselessly for his people. And the people knew he was righteous. And when the communist authorities came, they were very grieved by this priest because he was so zealous, and this village was so intense. And the people in this village didn't want to let go of their faith in God because they didn't want to embrace atheism. And of course, the communists don't see anything eternally, because for them there's no eternity. This life is all there is. So we need to acquire justice now. Justice is something of this age. Utopia is possible in this age if enough people die. The Christian never thinks this. He thinks eternally. There will never be justice in this age until the Master comes back again. There will never be utopia in this age, but only in the next. The authorities go to the priest and they try to get him to do what they want him to do. But once again, the priest is wise. He thinks eternally. He judges eternally. He knows that this is not the true justice of this world. These men have authority, but not over his soul. They have authority, but not true authority of righteousness. So he resists them. He doesn't accept their commands. The authorities are left with no choice but how to deal with him. So they decide they will have him shot, and the warden also. The warden is the chief layman of the parish, the one who takes care of the lamps and manages the church and has the keys to the parish. And so they summon the priest and the warden to the church, and they escort them from the church, and they're walking them through the entire village. No one has any doubt what's going to happen. And while the priest is walking, he has done so many funerals, even though he's so young, that he sings his own funeral and the funeral of the warden by memory as he walks through the town. He sings the funeral for a priest, and he sings the funeral for a layman as they walk together through the village. And all the people watch as the priest walks through the village, and then he's taken to the other side of the village, and he is summarily shot there. And the warden also. And the communists bury the body quickly, and they post a guard over it, but the guard leaves at night. And so when all the people come in the middle of the night, they tear the earth open, and they get the body of the priest out of the earth, and they quietly process with it back to the church. And the warden also, they take him out of the earth as well, because both of them are martyrs. And they carry the priest back to the church, and the masons have been working quietly during the day, cutting a hole in the altar of the church, in the floor of it, so when the priest is brought back, they'll lay him there, which is what we do with martyrs and holy men. We lay them inside the altar. So they bury this holy man in the altar, and they cover the altar quickly, and bury it. And the warden, I do not know where they buried him, probably near the church, because they honored him also, because he was a saint. The Bolsheviks, it seems, have prevailed, right? They shot the priest, they shot the warden, they've cowed the village, the church is turned into a storage shed, then it's turned into a movie theater, and then it is abandoned. But again, beloved, justice is not of this life only, beloved. It's not this way. Justice is eternal, right? The judgment of God is final. And so there can be no true justice in this life. So everything seems to have gone badly. And the priest has been forgotten, the church has been forgotten, everything's forgotten. And so in the 1990s, in Russia, everything has gone badly. Communism has ended. In the 1990s, they need to build a new building where this church has been. And so they ask a guy, and the building's gone, all that's left is this foundation. And so they ask this excavator, come and dig up the foundation, we want to build a new building here. The guy is running his excavator, he's digging up concrete, he's removing the foundation, and suddenly he hits something that shouldn't be there. He hits something with his blade. And he immediately stops his machine, he jumps out, he runs down to where his blade has struck something, and it is a box, a wooden box. It is wooden. And out of this box comes this smell that is incredible. And this excavator is shocked. The smell is heavenly. And so he starts to dig with his hands. Then he begins to find the edges of the coffin. He flips it open. And inside the coffin is a man sleeping. And it seems as though he has slept, but from yesterday. And it's the young priest. And he's wearing priestly vestments and everything. And so the young guy running the excavator is in a panic because he doesn't know what this is. He doesn't know what to do. So he runs and he says, I need to call the local bishop of this region and talk to him badly. And so he calls the bishop. And the bishop comes, and the bishop is amazed at the immaculateness of this priest's face. His face is perfect, as if he had slept yesterday. And the bishop orders him immediately exhumed and taken out. And the body of the warden, I do not know what happened with him when his body was found. But beloved, again, this is a foretaste. I can almost imagine this young priest, when he died that day, he was shot. He's received into heaven, and who knows who received him? Who knows which saints greeted him and took him to paradise to be presented before Christ? Perhaps it was our Father Chrysostom. I can imagine Chrysostom putting his arm around this young priest saying, my son, we watched you from on high, and your actions pleased us greatly. We were very pleased with how you carried yourself. No, beloved, those men who judged you, they're not the judges. Just neither were the men who judged me the true judges. The only judge is the Most High, and he holds a crown for you in his hands, my son. As for those men who condemned you, your Father in heaven is preparing fire for them, because they have not repented. Just like those who condemned me also come to bad, because they did not think about the coming kingdom, but only this one. They thought if they removed me, their life would be powerful. They thought, my son, if they shot you, things would be well. But things are not, my son, because God holds all things in his hands. And his justice is the only justice. And his judgment is the only correct judgment. And so, beloved, we should be careful how we judge. We should judge all things eternally. We should realize that all things have an eternal value. So don't judge by appearances. Judge with righteous judgment. But also judge with mercy, because mercy is eternal. It's not a good thing to be a great judge on this earth. What does it say in the second Psalm? This is what God will say to the false judges of this life. He says, he that dwelleth in the heavens shall laugh them to scorn, meaning the judges, the kings, the men who judge falsely. And the Lord shall deride them. That is hard. The Lord shall deride them.
He will deride the false judges. Can you imagine the Most High, the eternal, infinite God, deriding a man? Deriding him. That's intense. For his false judgments. Then, after he's derided them, then shall he speak unto them in his wrath. In his anger shall he trouble them. So he'll begin by scorning them, then he'll deride them, then he'll speak to them in wrath, and then he'll condemn them for judging falsely. And so it's very important for us, beloved, to judge rightly, judge carefully. We should judge as the publican judged. We should judge ourselves sinful before God. We should judge ourselves worthless and full of iniquity. We should also judge that the Lord is merciful from generation unto generation, and will pour his mercy forth upon men from eternity even unto eternity. This is a correct judgment. And so the publican is right. He's right to judge himself, and he's right to judge God as being merciful. As for Chrysostom, he's right also. This vestment is only an image of the glory that will come later. This is a stand-in for the heavenly glory that the righteous will wear in the next life. Chrysostom knew this. So when they took off his omophorein, he was unfazed by this. As for the young priest, he judged rightly also, because he understood that the only true authority is God's, and that even if the kings of this world wield authority badly, they shall face derision later. And this young priest wanted nothing to do with God's derision. He wanted to be praised, and indeed he was. God was so joyful with him that he made his body corrupt for decades and decades. And he was a great miracle for the people, the land consumed by atheism. So judge rightly, beloved. Judge correctly. Don't seek justice too much in this life, because you won't find it here. You'll find it in the next life. Amen.